Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about advising private clients. Now, we talked about previously, and as you go through the CFA readings, you're going to notice that private clients tend to be complex. So what does that mean? Well, that means you need to gather more information. You need to understand your client before you can give them advice. Now, for those of you who know me or have worked with me or taken one of my classes, you know that I've got a lot of medical doctors in my family that I reference a lot. I personally would have gone to medical school myself if I didn't faint every time I saw blood, and apparently medical school thought that was a problem. I'm not sure why, but that's where we are. Okay, so again, if I go into one of my family members or a surgeon and say, hey, I need my fifth vertebrae fixed, they're going to say, that's nice you're saying that, Randy, but I want to take an x-ray. I want to do an MRI. I want to evaluate you myself. I'm not just going to take your word for it. And that's what I want you to get away from as a professional in private wealth. You don't just take the client's word. They may not know even what they're asking. I've had clients tell me I'm extremely a risk taker, but then they tell me in another sentence, but I don't want to lose any money at all in my portfolio. Doesn't make any sense. So you got to gather this information for yourself. Okay, so I'm going to say, we say here private wealth managers should gather the following information. I want to cross out should. I want you to put must gather the following information and maybe even more information. And I want you to think about the term material information. So what is unique about this client that you need to understand that makes a difference that you have to think about when you're building their portfolios or helping them reach their goals? Again, private wealth clients are complex and they're unique. So you have to spend some time figuring these things out. Okay, so what do we need to know? Family circumstances. This is absolutely critical. Hey, this person has 9 kids. None of them are in college, and I want to pay for these students to go to college. You know, those are really important. Proof of client identification. Not going to spend a lot of time here, but you know now with the new laws, you've got to make sure that this client isn't money laundering, isn't from some particular state that we're not happy with right now or country. We've got to really dive into that. You're going to follow the rules on client identification. I want to know what type of retirement plan does this client have? Hey, does he have a defined contribution plan, or is he lucky and has a defined benefit plan? Because that's going to be really important to know. And then I want to stop for a minute and focus on sources of wealth. And the reason I like to talk about sources of wealth, I want to talk a little bit about situational profiling. And you see this all the time in the CFA Institute material. They tell you, don't base all of your information strictly on situational profiling, but you need to do it at the same time a little bit. So I want you to think about sources of wealth. Is it inherited? If your client is a barista at a coffee shop and they just inherited $500,000, it's going to be hard for this client to generate that money again. What's most likely happening, the willingness to bear risk for this client is probably average or below average. Now, in contrast, if you have a CEO that this is his third company that he's built, and he just recently sold the third company for $5 million, you know, his willingness to bear risk is probably going to be above average. So I want you to remember, when we're dealing with sources of wealth, I want you to think about that emotional component, that willingness to bear risk, because it's likely going to impact their portfolio. So if I see inherited money, I'm already thinking, their willingness to bear risk is probably average or below average, but we've got to get some more details. But at least it gets you start thinking about the right questions to be asking. This is no excuses, absolutely critical. What is your investment objective? Hey, I need to make $75,000 a year after tax in 15 years until I die. Okay, we can all agree it's crystal clear. I know exactly what needs to do. Risk tolerance. Remember, for individuals, it's ability to bear risk and willingness to bear risk. And one of the most common mistakes that people make, let's say ability to bear risk is above average. And let's say your client's willingness to bear risk is below average. Well, we do not sum these up and divide it by 2 and say that this client has an average risk tolerance. That is completely wrong. We take the most conservative. So if their ability to bear risk is above average, their willingness to bear risk is below average, the risk tolerance for this client is below average, not average. Don't make that common mistake, okay? And other thing I want you to think about, liquidity or unique terms. But I want to stop you for a second. One of the most common things that I see are candidates calling everything unique. Hey, client has a house. That's not unique. Client paid off the house. That's not unique. These are super wealthy people. These clients are the luckiest people in the whole world. You know, paying off a house is nothing new to them. Hey, client has 3 kids and they don't live at home. That is not unique. So again, I want you to hold unique out only for the situations that are extremely extraordinary. Hey, client's family died in a car accident 5 years ago. He inherited $12 million. That is unique. The fact that he has 3 kids that are independent and not living at home is not unique. It might be unique in your life or my life, but not in the CFA world where everybody is an overachiever. Okay, so again, if we're going to gather financial information to really understand our client, we need to do a better job on gathering assets and liabilities and gathering that information to understand it. And I want you to think about what the CFA Institute is getting you to go to is a holistic approach. We need to do a better job of understanding our client's true situation. Okay, so what are we doing here? Well, I want to know cash and deposit accounts. I want to know, do you have any brokerage accounts, any investment accounts? Oh, you didn't tell me you have $70,000 in a concentrated stock in your total portfolio of $100,000. I need to know these things. You've got to gather that information, and the clients may not tell you because they just don't think it's important. Okay, retirement accounts. It's absolutely critical. Do they have a defined contribution plan versus a defined benefit plan? Because if it's a defined contribution plan, we have to worry about the risk. You know, if it's a defined benefit plan, the employer will worry about that. Defined contribution, that client of yours has to handle that risk. And if I'm advising that client, I've got to help him with that risk. Okay? Other employee benefits. Do you have any stock options? Stock options seem to be used more and more today than any time I remember in my career. Okay, do you own a private company? How much is it worth? Can you sell it? You know, what are the details about that? We need that information. Do you have any life insurance? But this is the part that I want you to zero in on. Does it have any cash value? Why do we care about that? Because maybe you're so old now or you have so much wealth, you don't need life insurance anymore. So this cash value, it might make sense to turn in this insurance policy and get that cash value. So again, we need to understand if it's just a term insurance policy or does this policy have a cash value? And then the other thing we need to talk about are real estate. And then the last thing I want you to think about in assets is these additional asset classes. And in the super wealth and the high net worth area, this is growing more and more. Cars, jewelry. I personally collect watches. My wife is a freelance news photographer. She collects antique cameras. These things are very expensive. These things have a market. We can sell them. The other thing I want you to think about, art. Art, it is very likely to have a high net worth client that owns art. You're going to have to figure these things out. It's a different market, but at the same time, it's also a source of assets that we need, and we have to think about the same thing. If all of their net worth is in art, they're not diversified. So again, we need to understand that. Now, if we're going to talk about the asset situation, we need to also do a better job on the liability side. So what are some things that we need to know on the liability side? Hey, do you have any debt? Do you have any credit card balances? Have you paid off that mortgage? And let's not forget about student loans. I know for a second, if I could have measured your blood pressure when I said the word student loans, your blood pressure might have just shot up a little bit. Yeah, guess what? A lot of people have student loans, and these balances can be substantial. Could be $200, $300. I have a friend that has $400,000 in medical student loans from getting his doctoral degree. His MD degree. So we need to understand these situations because that's a huge drain on their cash. Okay, and do you have any margin debt in the broker accounts? Basically, we need to do a better job understanding both the client's assets and those liabilities. Okay, so here's a sample net worth statement, and I'm going to say you need to know this for the exam. You need to be able to analyze this, and here's where we're going. The goal is not getting the total assets or the total liabilities. Yes, we need to know those, but what we're really looking at is the total net worth, because that is going to impact your ability to bear risk. I see way too many people, especially in the Washington, D.C. area where I live, that focus on total assets. Well, guess what? If you don't factor in those liabilities, there are so many people that I know that are making $200,000 and $300,000 a year, and they have less money in the bank than my 6-year-old son. So again, assets are one thing, but liabilities have to be factored in. And the whole goal is I want to get this total net worth. Why? Because I can tie that back to ability to bear risk. Okay, so please do some work on this. And again, the better you can make a representative net worth statement, the better you can understand your client's situation and the better you can help them. Okay, so now we're going to get into the dreaded taxes. I'm going to take away some pressure for you right now. Guess what? If nobody's told you on the exam, you are not a CPA. You are not giving tax advice. On the exam, you're either going to do pretty much on average one of two things. You're going to parrot back whatever they tell you. Oh, the tax rate is 15%. Okay, so under the constraints and taxes, I'm going to write taxes are 15%. And then if it's too complicated, you're going to seek advice. Okay, so you can spend weeks going through all the different tax readings in the CFA Institute. You don't need to memorize these things. You just need to understand what's important and focus on what information is given to you in the case. I promise you, you don't have to go out and start reading tax books for large countries. It's going to be given to you on the exam. Okay, so here's a few things though. There are some general classifications and you do need to know these. Income tax. Well, this is that thing a lot of us don't like to pay. So it's going to be on any form of income. What is it? What corresponds income? They're likely going to give it to you on the exam. So any wages, rental income, did I get some dividends, some type of interest, capital gains? Again, read the question and take a breath, make sure you understand what's happening and focus on what they gave you in the information. Okay, next thing, wealth-based taxes. Hey, you're going to pay taxes on real estate and there might be some inheritance or gifts or estate issues. If this gets too complicated, what do? You tell your client to seek advice. And that's what you're going to do on the exam as well. Regurgitate what you need to, put back what you need to on the exam. If it's too complicated, they need to seek qualified advice, and it's not you. You are not a tax advisor. You build and monitor portfolios. Okay, and then maybe there's a consumption tax. Okay, sales tax, value-added tax. Again, is it worth going through hundreds of pages to try to understand all these differences and rates? Just know that they vary country to country, and they're likely to give you this information on the exam. So don't get too hung up on it. Just get what you need and move on. Okay, so let's dig into this a little bit more. So let's think about, there are some things that we can do to reduce this adverse impact of taxes. So think about this. Our whole goal with private wealth clients, we're trying to maximize after-tax return. That's what our goal is. If you're not taking into tax considerations, you are not doing your client right. Okay, it's that simple. So there's some terms that we need to understand. Tax avoidance. There is nothing wrong with putting your client in an account that's legally exempt from taxes and capital gains. There is something wrong if you're using illegal tax evasion techniques. The IRS is pretty particular about those things, and they're likely to catch you. And as Al Capone found out, it doesn't turn out so well. There are so many reality TV stars today that are getting in tax evasion problems. So again, tax avoidance is fine. Use the tools that are available to you. Hey, after so many years in this account, it's tax deferred, or there's no taxes, or tax exempt, or municipal securities. Those are all great. Avoiding taxes by lying or doing some illegal tax evasion, that's not what we're getting at here. Okay? And just know that we might be able to use gift insurance or estate planning techniques to lower those taxes. There's nothing wrong with that, but they'll give you that information in the case. Okay, so let's move on. So tax reduction. Hey, that sounds pretty good to me. Why don't you buy a municipal security? Why don't you buy something, hey, maybe in this highly taxable account, we should put stocks that don't pay dividends. So we can control and use this account to help us shield some of these taxes. Nothing wrong with that. Tax deferral. Hey, if I can defer for 20 years to pay these taxes, time value of money, great. In 20 years, hey, this thing, maybe my income's lower, I'll have lower taxes. So again, there's nothing wrong. In fact, you have to be considering these tax reductions and tax deferrals. Okay, so now we're going to get into sort of a hodgepodge of information. Other client information. And you can't memorize every single thing you need to know. It's going to jump out at you almost magically in the question, what is material that you need to understand for this client? So guess what? So these are some situations or additional information that a private wealth manager, will need if they're trying to help their client. So, hey, do you have any wills? What about estate planning documents? Trust? Do you have a trust attorney, a trust advisor? Has this been updated? Okay, insurance policies, same thing. We need to understand them. Has a qualified person reviewed them? Service guidelines. So this is the big thing. If I'm your private wealth manager, do I have full trading discretion? Or every time I see an opportunity, do I have to try to reach you on the phone and you're hard to reach? So we need to define this discretionary versus non-discretionary account. If it's a non-discretionary account, I have to get your permission to make any trades. What do I do if I can't reach you? Huge problem. Okay, portfolio reporting requirements. How am I going to report your portfolio? How are we going to communicate? What about liquidity? Oh, Johnny's in private school. We need to pay $30,000 a year. Okay, I need to plan for that. I need to understand that. I need to factor that into the portfolio. What about communications? If you're in a wealth management team, it's possible there are a lot of team members that they have, maybe they're CPAs, attorneys, mortgage lenders, private bankers. What's the rules on that? Do you want me to share this information with my whole team? Do you want me to keep it confidential? We need to get these things out in the open in the beginning. Okay, a couple of things I want to talk about. When you're dealing with private clients, you've got to focus both on technical and soft skills. So I was very strong in technical skills. I had to work a lot on my soft skills. So what happened when I left the institutional world and then I would meet with private clients? I'm meeting with Granny Jones and I'm talking about mean variance optimization and factor weights and Carhart models and all sorts of things, and the client's looking at me like I'm speaking a foreign language. That is not appropriate. Granny Jones may not need to know your factor load rates or how your Carhart model and how you're looking to increase liquidity and adding a fifth factor in your portfolio. That's where these soft skills come into play. So the technical skills, guess what? You're going to need both technical skills and soft skills to gather that information, because what do you have to do? You have to make an appropriate IPS. That is really the goal. And again, getting back to what we focused previous sections, TTLLURR. I need to think about taxes. I need to think about the client's time horizon, any legal issues, any liquidity issues. Is there something unique? I need to think about risk. And again, in a private client, that's ability to bear risk and willingness to bear risk. Institutional clients, we don't really have to focus on that willingness to bear risk. Hey, institutions don't have feelings, right? And then we want to focus on return. So a lot of times you've got to work backwards. You've got to work on the constraints and then think about the objectives. So I want you to think about two words that I like to think about when I go through this material. It's constrained optimization. You want to help the client as much as you can, but there's some constraint. It might be you don't have discretionary authority, or there might be some liquidity demands, or you might not be allowed to buy a stock that starts with the letter A. Again, you're trying to maximize these constraints. Okay, other things. So these technical skills, what can you do? Well, getting your CFA, you're already getting a lot of technical skills. You're getting proficiency in capital markets, asset planning, portfolio construction, monitoring. Get educated. That's what you're doing with the CFA. Now, what else do you need? We talked about these soft skills. Hey, if you don't like talking to clients and you're very shy, you need to get better at that, because how are you going to have a serious conversation with your client if you're too shy to ask the clients the tough questions? I can tell you it is very hard to sit in front of a family and go, okay, Jeff, so when you die, this is how much money your wife is going to have. Or when you die, this is how much money your kids are going to have. They're not fun conversations, but if you're going to do your client right, you need to have these discussions. So take public speaking classes, put yourself out there. You're going to have to develop your soft skills just as much as your educational hard skills and technical skills if you're going to be efficient in dealing with your client. Okay, so communications and language. I'll tell you right now, it's a global world out there. You might have some global clients. English is a very hard language to learn, and there are not a lot of consistent rules. It seems easy for us, but someone from another country, we have to be careful the language we use, and they may not really understand what we're saying. So let's make sure we focus on that. Social skills, we talked about that. Educational skills, That's important. And business development and sales skills. Guess what? If you're going to be a private client advisor, you probably have to gather assets. You're going to have to think about business development. You're going to have to think about sales skills, or you're going to go hungry. If you work at a big firm, you might have to raise $10 to $15 million a year in assets. So you have to think about, do I have those skills? Do I want these skills? Because if part of your job is gathering more assets, if that's not what you want to do, then you're going to fail. Okay, so again, it is not enough to just know technical skills. If you're going to work with private clients, to be an effective portfolio manager, and more importantly, to pass the CFA exam, you're going to have to learn the soft skills too.